worst waste is going through a struggle without wisdom. Struggles are unavoidable, many of them in life. Okay, we don't choose them. We go through them. What is avoidable is going through a struggle without asking yourself the question of what you learn from it.
That is beautiful. Welcome to the Mikey G podcast experience. What up, folks? I am excited. Alfredo, welcome to the Mikey G podcast experience. How are you doing?
I'm doing great here in New York on a better day today. It's sunny.
Yes,
I am happy. And Mike, thank you for having me and everybody listening. I hope we get some wisdom, some fun, going deep into some I think, important things.
Alfredo is the man, the myth, the legend. And one of the things, thank you very much for reaching out to me. I think you just randomly found some of my stuff on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you gave me a note, and then we had a conversation, and it was super exciting. So he's an expert in positive psychology, insanely passionate about giving people their strengths, and thinks everybody has a right to purpose. People that are avid listeners of this sounds pretty familiar. And it was so cool. And which really excited me was there's somebody out there, that grew up in a totally different place of the world. And we both came to the same conclusions, like literally what he believes in and what he embodies is the same thing I do with my life and this podcast and everything I try to do. And then I can't wait to talk about our stories because they're eerily similar as well. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But this is one of the most exciting things is he is an everyday MMA fighter in practice. This is how he stays healthy. This is how he still looks beautiful on camera right now. Alfredo, how did I do? Anything else you want to add there on the formal intro?
I even feel proud of myself and, of somebody who is so self-critical.
Yeah.
That's a great accomplishment, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's just, I think to you too, probably the reason you reached out and we talked is, I really do think what we talk about and what we both believe in is because I think I told you too, this 5 to 6 years ago, I really just saw all this coming, right? I was like, this tech is just folding in humanity in a bad way. And we need to understand that I think we're all connected in my mind, right? Humans are just like this connected tissue. And when all of your self-worth goes away, right? Your job title and your money and how much you're earning, and you have to completely think about everything differently, we're going to be in a world of hurt if you don't understand who you are as a human being and what your superpower is. And we resonate on a deep, deep level. So to get there and have a more beautiful conversation about this, we ask one simple question. And Alfredo, that is to reiterate for the audience that has never seen this show before, the world famous Mikey G podcast experience question. Alfredo, how did you get the seat you're sitting in today? Please give me chapter 1, 2, and 3 to reiterate what those are for the audience. Chapter 1 is your childhood. Prompting questions here. Parents, parental figures. Were there some mantras that you lived by? Be kind, pay it forward, work hard. Were you a tinkerer? Did you play sports? A vivid memory. Give me 2 sentences. We'll talk forever. Cannot wait to do that. Chapter 2 is going to be your professional career, entrepreneurship, your studies, whatever that may be. But again, remember here, we are interested in the insights, lesson learned. A lot of those usually come from failures. Some of them come from success. And then chapter 3 is what you're working on with positive psychology. What does the next 3 to 6 months look like? And then we'll wind it down. So have at it. Start anywhere in the childhood, Alfredo. I cannot wait to hear it.
Look, I grew up in Argentina. I was one of those kids that basically wished that their parents would divorce.
Mm,
Okay, that's very, that's a strong statement. I pray to God that my parents would split.
mhm,
I loved my parents, bless their memory tremendously, but clearly they had a dynamics that was at least toxic. And the way of loving each other was a way of hurting each other.
mm,
And I was all the time caught in the dynamics. I basically ran away from my home so many times, and I just walk a mile away, and then I got scared and walked back. I
mm,
think that my parents had some kind of mental illness, and this was Argentina 40 years ago. Nobody talked about it. Psychiatrists were like completely unknown, and then they did the best they could.
I do have a question, I'm gonna pop in right here.
Yeah.
Why do you think, and you've been in this space, but this is always really fascinating to me is, um, I think one of the things I've heard, a lot about living in America is, I just have this vivid memory. There was where were we at? In San Antonio, there was somebody from, Denmark that was visiting us, and there was just a person in a wheelchair, like, on a dance floor, and we're having a blast, right? And one of the things I think I've appreciated about here is that I've had a lot of friends from Europe or other places, and they're like, America is definitely a lot more accepting of just people being different, right? And then talking about mental health and these things. So my question is, why 40 years ago was it so taboo and mental health was just not talked about? Was it because it was embarrassing to people? Was it just the way it was? What are your thoughts?
No, look, today is still taboo, even in
Oh, but
America.
it was even more, right? It's like at least
Well,
we're trying to start to have a little conversation, right?
well,
Um,
the language we used, they were crazy, they were lunatics, you know,
mm,
nuts. Look at the language we used. It just in South America 40 years ago to be known for a mental illness was basically a death sentence in terms of not getting a job or
right.
not being trusted. But I must also say, I don't want to sound completely negative. My parents gave me the gift of resilience
Yes.
and endurance of knowing how to enjoy the good moments,
Mhm.
of their perseverance amidst their own struggles, that
Yes.
they, in this toxic relationship, ultimately, at the end, they learn to love each other
Mhm.
and they found
Mhm.
redemption. I think that
Wow.
my
Yeah.
father made a night 180 degrees at the end of his journey and
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
peace, and they loved each other in a certain way. And I think that me coming to America at the age of 20, before globalization, which
Mm,
I told my friends I'm going to America, and was like, you're going to the moon or Venus. We didn't know anybody. My first trip was to the University of Cincinnati, where I got a
mm.
scholarship, and I remember going to buy a ticket from Buenos Aires to Cincinnati, and you couldn't buy it. I mean, nobody knew where Cincinnati was.
Right, right, right.
I couldn't locate Cincinnati on a map. I had to buy a ticket to Miami and buy one at the airport. Then, I came to the States before, you know, everybody thought I was crazy. And in some way I was escaping from,
Yes, yes.
I was running away. But the same token, that was a blessing in disguise, because all that I achieved in my life and the happiness I have today, it had to do also with that journey. Then you never know how the gifts will come in your life, and sometimes you have to read your life backwards. Okay,
Yeah.
from the last chapter to the first, not in sequential order, but in reverse order, in order to be
Interesting.
able to see your blessing.
And you said something very, impactful right there, which was you'll never know how these blessings unfold or unpack, right? What is your like advice? And because you hear this stuff all the time online, is like work hard and persevere and it'll all work out. What is your just like thought to someone who is struggling right now to like figure out these blessings, right? Is it just a matter of time and reflection? What are your thoughts there?
I think time is always important. I always tell people I work with and I coach, worst waste is going through a struggle without wisdom.
Mm,
Struggles are unavoidable, many of them in life. Okay, we don't choose them. We go through them. What is avoidable is going through a struggle without asking yourself the question of what you learn from it.
that is beautiful.
That's a complete waste. And I always, by the way, I do not like this idea that you got to go through suffering to learn. Okay.
Interesting. Talk to
Okay.
me a little bit more about that.
This comes from religious traditions in which basically we bought into the paradigm that suffering brings clarity and suffering brings redemption. I
Right.
don't like that. Okay. I think that you can learn and find fulfillment from the good and the pleasurable. Okay,
Yeah.
that you don't need. Okay, but we are all going to go through suffering because that's the nature of life. And if you are going to go through it, then your job is not to go to waste, but not learning from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then it is very difficult, Mikey, to learn as you go through the suffering. Okay, you're going through a storm, but it's going to be a moment where you are either on the eye of the storm or out of it. And what people try to do is to leave it behind immediately and move to the next thing. That's a
Yeah.
mistake. It has
Yeah.
to be a moment of reflection and asking questions about what they learn.
Yeah.
Moving
Yeah.
too fast to forget is a waste of opportunity.
And my question to you is, what does reflection look like for like what do you physically or actually tell people to do to get that? Because again, that's kind of like a broad I can't touch what you said. Like I get what you're saying, but it's like, okay, so how do I actually do that?
Yeah,
Where's the
look,
practical application of what you just said?
then we learn from positive psychology that each person has what is called an explanatory style. The explanatory style is how you tell yourself your life. And we need to understand that the reality of what you tell yourself is even more real than what's happened outside of you. Because two people are going to go through the same problem, and one is going to come out of it positively and the other negatively. And there are no difference in the events, only in the way they tell the events to themselves. That we are all writers, and what we write is our own life.
I
But
love that.
But we don't know it. You know why? Because we've been writing the same style of writing for the last 20, 30 years.
Yes.
Then you write in automatic pilot, and you may be a writer of tragedies of your own life and living a tragedy because that's what you write inside,
Yeah.
or comedy or adventure, and you don't even do not know the style you're writing about
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Then then there are some keywords that give us, an understanding of what kind of writer we are. If something negative something happened to you, and you use the words always, okay,
Oh.
every time, mostly, then you say, "I always fail." Okay, I never succeed. Then you're writing a tragedy. If something negative something to you happened to you, and you say to yourself, well, this time I didn't sleep well yesterday. That's why I didn't do well on the interview.
Mhm.
Or sometimes when I eat poorly, I feel bad all day long. or whatever, the words you use, they are the ones, that make the Lego pieces of your story. Then when you're talking to yourself and having internal dialogue, you stop for a second and you ask yourself what words I am using, always, never, sometimes. Now, you write it down, even better, because you write down how I talk to myself in the last 2 minutes when something negative happens and begin analyzing which language you use. I tell you, when you take control of the language, you take control of your life.
Mm, that is a beautiful, beautiful insight. The one thing I'm actually interested in too, that I love to ask is like your actual interest, right? At this time in life. Like, let's get to like high school, middle school time. But as you're evolving and growing as a human being, is it writing? Is it art? Is it science? What is really piquing your interest as you're starting to form?
Well, I wasn't always been an avid reader. Okay. And reading is an interesting activity. Reading in some way is creating a reality on the page or connecting to a different geography, the geography of the text, when the geography of life is painful. Then I began reading as a way to live in the story or the philosophy. I like to read philosophy, to live in the philosophical ideas more than living in the pain of reality. And I read and read and read, and I found on the intellectual life a place of security, a place of growth. Then, look, I have a law degree, I have a doctorate in philosophy, I have an MSW with clinical therapy, and then I became an executive coach and positive psychology. Then, then some people say, well, that's a lot of learning, and you are so smart. And I would say that what if you look at my character strengths, which are the top strengths of positive psychology, my top three are creativity, love of learning, and curiosity.
Mm, mm.
Okay, then it wasn't so much about being smart, but being in an alignment between what is best in me and living a life that reflected it.
So you came what was it about reading and learning? So because this happened from a really early age. Do you think this is yet another transition of like reading form of escape, but actually the positive impact was you're learning and growing? Is that simple, more complex? Any
No,
insights there?
no, I think that I was lucky in some way that my escape was also my strength.
Yes.
Okay, and I would say that for many people that happens too. That they usually, unless they go into something very toxic like drugs
Yeah.
and
That's where it
and
gets bad.
right, drugs or self-inflicted pain. Many people escape to what they make them feel, realized. But if you don't know it, you don't take full advantage of it. That's where the reflection comes. Then once I learned my character strengths of positive psychology, then my escape became a blessing, not just an escape,
Mm,
because it became intentional,
mhm, mhm.
directional, and purposeful. You see, you don't escape knowing that you're escaping.
Mm, mhm.
Okay, the understanding that you're escaping, to transform it into a blessing, is like you mentioned, the art of reflection.
Yeah.
And for me, came through therapy. I am a believer I've been always going to therapy. For me, it's an hour a week where I can talk with somebody I trust in complete confidence and go deep into myself. It came through reading and intellectual pursuit. It came through spirituality
Yeah.
and meditation, where you let through meditation your thought flow and you observe them. That's a very important aspect of meditation, to observe your thoughts without judging. And like you said, physical activity, the MMA, believe it or not, it's a spiritual time for me.
Yes.
Then all those things together made me transition from escaping as a reaction to escaping and growing as a reflection.
Yeah.
And then I came to America and I wanted to study philosophy, and I studied PhD in philosophy, and I taught at the university. I love to teach, you know, and in a different settings. I taught at the university. Now I do it through workshops at corporations,
Right.
which is my main activity.
So before we get there though, take me through like your first studies and then your first couple jobs of like when you started your career, right?
I came here through America without a word of English. And I
Wow.
remember I remember I went to Cincinnati, and I came early to the university. Then the dorms were empty,
Yeah.
and I was hungry because the cafeteria was closed. And I walked down the street, and I wanted to eat something. I was starving, and I asked somebody on the streets with no English, like, eat, 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 eat. And the guy said to me, I remember, Subway. And in Argentina, and I look at the dictionary. I had a pocket dictionary, and I look what Subway was.
Uh,
In Argentina, at the subway stations,
right.
there are stores where you can eat, cafeterias, and stores.
Uh,
Then I was like crazy looking for the entrance to the subway, walking blocks
oh
and
my
blocks and
god.
blocks and blocks and blocks. And then until I was coming back completely crazy, and I see Subway
Yeah.
sandwich. Okay, that was my level of English.
Okay. So what did you first study then?
The first thing I study is, well, I studied clearly English as a second language. That was the
Hmm.
first thing I did. It was the University of Cincinnati. They were all Asians. I was the only one from the western part of the world because it was a big music school. And I
Mm,
remember the teacher brought us to read, of all things, from Plato, from the
wow.
Republic, just to practice our English. And I was the only one in the class who knew who Plato was, because they were all coming from a different kind of intellectual background.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Then philosophy was my first thing, and my passion. And I took as much philosophy classes as I could without the language. It was a big struggle. I still have the dictionaries I use, all marked, all highlighted. I glue myself to TV to learn as much as I could.
Never thought about that. TV was a big learning
I
experience
had a
for you,
friend
huh?
of mine, the guy who gave me the scholarship to the university. He picked me up from the airport. He heard me talking no English whatsoever, and he went straight from the airport to a store and bought me a black and white small TV.
Oh my god, that's amazing. So, because this is really fascinating to me in the sense that for somebody that grew up in America and is fluent in English, college is hard. And now you're going to college and trying to learn English all at the same time. That is that's insane, right?
But it was for me. After college, I was already a lawyer. Then I had some, in Argentina. I finished law school. Then I had some, discipline in how to learn. Again, I took English as second language. Look at newspapers, and the professors were very nice to me. Um, the university had somebody that when I wrote papers that would check my papers. They were really very helpful. Interestingly, my wife sometimes says, tune it down because my language comes from reading philosophical work.
Mm,
And and sometimes, when I write those things like that, I use words that my wife says, look, nobody uses those. That's, and English speakers sometimes when I write, they don't believe that
right,
English is my second language.
right.
But that comes because I was trained
Yeah,
mostly in the
yeah,
in the academic
yeah,
world.
yeah. So talk to me about because you had like a really successful career. And so talk to me about the actual career part where you progress, but when you go through this progression of your career, I want 2 to 3 real big lessons learned, insights, failures from wins, whatever it may be. But I'm interested in this meat right here, right? Because and then we'll get into the positive psychology because we talked about, but on an intro call, we had this ramp to success and then the downfall from grace, right? But
Yeah.
the ramp to success, I'm very interested in because there had to be some great insights there.
Yes. Look, the you know, I think that the main quality I had for my success, first of all, communication and passion. I come from Argentina. It's all passion. Everything you talk about is like 10 times more passion than the usual American voice. Okay, your blood boils, your talk with your body, your
Yes.
talk with your eyes. And then I did very well at interviews.
Mm,
I interviewed very well because the commitment and the passion were all really patent, clear, and people always fell in love with that, and it was completely genuine. That's the way I am. I grew up in that culture. Then I bring a lot of passion. I I have the issue of justice is central to me. I come from the military dictatorship in Argentina times, and studied law, then justice and doing the right thing and being committed are central, to who I am. Then as a teacher and an academic, that commitment to the topic and the passion and the creativity were like, I think that were way behind me as moving me ahead. Then I became the executive director of what is called the Hartman Institute, which is an international institute with its base in Jerusalem, Israel. And he became the executive director. And I travel all the United States fundraising money and connecting with people. And I am an introvert, super introvert. People don't believe it when they see me in action. But for me, doing is a way to extrovert.
yeah.
Given a choice, I stay, with the coffee and a good book, reading all day long. Then I travel the country, connecting with people and fundraising and teaching and traveling. And then I became the executive director of what is called the Skirball Center in Manhattan, which is an adult education center, where I designed classes and taught classes and created my own faculty.
Oh, the
And,
classes were centered around what?
centered around spiritual subjects, history, philosophy, ethics. And, again, I found an alignment between my what is called character strengths, creativity, love of learning, and curiosity, purpose and objective. And I was thriving until, I lost everything.
Yeah,
And
so before you get to you lost everything, take give me 1 or 2 examples, and what this could be, leadership, the importance of hard work, whatever these insights might be, because you did progress and you got these titles and you were seeing success.
yes,
Give me 1 to 2 really tangible insights of that
good.
process.
I give you my number one insight. Don't fix it, nourish it.
Mm. Now
You
unpack that a little bit for me,
you
like, give
need
me some examples.
we need to move from the culture of fixing to the culture of nourishing. This is a basic principle of positive psychology.
Mhm.
You get much farther nourishing than fixing. And what happened is that since childhood, the system is about fixing others. Parents always tell you what you have to be better at. Okay, and they do it out of love, but they are afraid that if you have a weakness, you're not going to succeed in life.
Mm.
Then they don't want the best for you, but they focus on what is weak. And then you go to school and the teachers say he's a good student, but he's not good at math. And then the people feel if you're not good at math, you're not going to be a good engineer and do well at business and have a successful career. And they focus on the negative. Then you go to do sports, and your coach also focuses in what is not you're not doing great. And then you go to a job, and your manager give you reviews on what you need to improve. And lo and behold, before you know it, the entire world is pointing all the time at what you are not good at.
Yeah, yes. And
And
so, uh, the concept of nourishment instead of fixing, is the insight and recommendation for, I'm assuming, others and yourself, right? Can you give me an example of what that looks like of through this time or your life experience of where you were maybe told to fix, instead you nourished and it benefited you?
yes, I mean, look, the the I tell you a story about myself. Then I was terrible at math. Okay, and my parents would come after it was in high school. They had this, they went and they met all my professors or my teachers. And then my parents would come at night, and I was a stellar student. And they would say to me, very, you did great, Alfredo, with the exception of math. Then what did I remember? Not that I was good at everything. I only remember that I wasn't good at math. And then I went the next day to school, and was a traumatic experience because I would be thinking about math all the time. And I did worse at math. Now, you need to know the basic of math. Was I going to become a mathematician? No, I became a philosopher and an executive coach. I never was going to need math to become who I was.
Right.
Imagine if we had nourished what I was great at. I would have been even greater.
Yeah.
Okay, then we do it all the time. We do it with everything. Look, you have a pipe bursting at your basement, and you call the plumber to fix it. Fixing is bringing a crisis back to the point before the crisis. The
Right.
pipe stopped leaking. Fixing does not entail improvement. Fixing is reestablishing the condition to what it was before the crisis occurred. There is no growth. Nourishing is the art of going beyond the current state to the more elevating one. The difference between fixing and nourishing is enormous in the way you face the world, face others, and the attitude you have. And I see it with CEOs all the time when I go to corporations. The CEOs fixing, who actually sometimes they feel useless if they don't have a crisis to fix. And the
Mm.
nourishers, who are always looking what is the best in the team to let this team flourish to the best they could be. Two completely different ways of leadership.
Yep. And the second creates, ironically, um, because it's the opposite of what we've been taught, it creates amazing outcomes, don't you think?
Amazing is quantifiable. 25% more performance, 35% more loyalty. The numbers is all quantified by positive psychology. Google did an experiment a few years ago where they ponder why groups, teams with brilliant people were underperforming teams with so-called average people. Okay, and they did a study, took years. They went through, and they were focusing on the talents of the people who were at each team, and they didn't get anywhere until they changed directions, and they began studying the team dynamics. And the number one difference between performing teams and underperforming teams was psychological safety. And what is psychological safety? The feeling, the knowledge that you could make mistakes and learn from them without negative consequences. Okay, that's nourishing.
Yeah.
Okay, the
Yeah.
nourishing is not only just saying a pat on your back, hey, you're great, cheerleading. No, no, no. Nourishing is the learning culture by which you allow people to take risks and make mistakes without feeling that mistake is going to cost them their career. Psychological safety, number one component of team performance.
And the number one thing that I deal with and I struggle with is I believe in the nourishment path. And then when I get a leader that does not believe in the nourishment path, I try to nourish my peers, right? Uh, but the interesting thing that you say, and why I truly believe in what you say, is at my level, if even me nourishing my peers, it doesn't matter because it's not coming from the top down. And there's just nothing I can change my relationships on an individual level, but I'm never going to change the culture and the feeling. And it's just going to continue to run that way until it comes from top down. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I would just say that it matters. It matters how you treat your peers. Actually, they are the ones with whom you spend most of the time. And when I work with teams and everybody learns each other's strengths, then there is a different view of each other, and they begin leveraging in a positive way what is best in each other. But definitely, it's all about culture, and you need a culture of nourishment from top down that permeates the entire system. If the leaders are not in the nourishing path, it's going to become extremely difficult for everybody else to achieve their potential,
100%.
because they are going to be second guessing themselves all the time, and they're going to feel abused in some cases. And who wants to who can be at the best if they feel the weight of judgment constantly, upon them? That's it works short. The problem is it work in the short. At first you get great results. Pressure is a good tool to get results in the short term.
Mm,
And then you get blinded by the immediate results. is a terrible tool for long-term commitment, motivation, and perseverance. People are going to run away from you at the first opportunity.
100%. So beautiful. Let's move to the fall from grace and just we'll do that and then we'll get into the positive psychology. So take me through that. And then obviously the big lesson learned from the screeching halt.
Then there is, there are some people who can uh, divide their life, and a between before and after that happens in a minute, on a split second. That happened to me on June 19th, 2013.
You got it down to the
Oh,
date.
yes, around 10 in the morning when I was arrested. A friend of mine who was a retired detective gave me one of those friend and family badges. Actually, it's the most powerful thing you can have is the badge
Yeah.
itself, a
Yeah.
small replica. And he said to me, Alfredo, with this, you're going to have no problems. And I was manic. I was suffering from mania for a few months. I went to my psychiatrist and I lied because manic people want the mania. You work like crazy, you don't sleep, then you have many hours to work, you lose weight, you have boundless energy, you feel on top of the world, grandiosity, then you want your mania. Then I went to my psychiatrist, I lied, and he gave me an antidepressant.
Mm.
Then I was manic, wrongly medicated, and with a badge. That's not a good combination, Mikey.
No.
And I began patrolling the streets of the highways of New York, and telling people, showing my badge and telling people how to drive. Until I show it to a young lady, and she took her phone, make a phone call, and 30 seconds later, I had 3 patrols behind me. And I was arrested. I was accused of impersonating a police officer,
Mm.
felony. I was taken to court. The lady was there, pointed, he was the one. Then later, they had a restraining order against me, and I looked at her name and I Googled her and I saw that she was getting married. And I fell off my chair. He was getting married to the policeman that arrested me.
Oh, wow.
that,
Yeah.
that's why that was a phone call she made. Then I was arrested and I appear on the news as
Wow.
I newspapers. I lost my job. I lost my friends. Lost all my consulting engagements. I lost everything. I was hospitalized in a psychiatric ward, and that's where they discovered that I had bipolar disorder. Then, in a span of 2 weeks, I went from a complete redefinition of how I saw myself, now having to deal with bipolar, being jobless, on the press, friends stopping talking to me, complete depression. And I went into depression for many months on a couch, Mikey, like unable to move in complete obscurity and darkness, with no sense of future, suicidal. I was hospitalized a couple of more times until one morning I felt an energy, a power me, lifting me up from the couch and pushing me up to my study. And there I found on my desk something that would change my life. And I can't tell you how it got there because I have no recollection. Was a file which I opened, and there I found a test in positive psychology I had taken a few months before, and I read the result, my strength, my character strength, creativity, love of learning, curiosity, perseverance, and courage. And something like a switch was turned inside of me, and I said, Alfredo, wow, that's who you are, and you forgot all about it. And a month later, with depression, with the court cases, I was back in school to study social work, and I did fantastic, all propelled by my character strengths. Then
That is an
positive, positive psychology, positive psychology saved my life.
yeah,
I said, I'm going to go through life to the rest of my life, giving people the gift of having their top character strengths.
incredible, incredible story. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. My one question though, because I went through my mental illness, major depressive disorder, and I still struggle with, I have some thoughts as to like what that click was, right? And started it. But you described it in a really interesting way as you felt this energy lifting you up, right? It got you to see this result. Reflecting back, what do you think that was? Like how do you even describe it, that making sense of that because you're at such a horrific place, right?
Look, I think that there is a preparation that you have to do today for when the storm comes. And as I mentioned, I was going through therapy before that. It was I already was I already had the top strengths of body psychology. I just had forgotten them. Okay. Then I you had to build a strong ship from when you go through the storm. Okay. But know your strength, know your friends, okay, have discipline. Okay, and when the storm hits, you're going to be in a better situation. Clearly, the first couple of months with depression, you cannot fight it. Okay. And people who tell you, come on, just take a shower, take a walk. They're well intentioned, but there are some moments of depression where unless you are in danger, you need to go through it. It's a process. But you have to be well equipped for those moments where you can move ahead. And
So
I
you so
have
you had a good ship foundation
yes.
that you think helped you get long enough to a point where you felt the positive energy.
It's like having some money in the bank for bad times.
Ooh,
You have
I
to
like
be,
that analogy as well too. Uh,
then you have to build yourself. You have to build your resilience, your self knowledge, your strength now. And the people have it wrong. And I mentioned it before. The paradigm is that you need to go through tough times to get the things thick skin, to toughen yourself up. No way. You had to be strong now for when the bad times come.
Ooh,
I think that there is, and this comes all from this conception that suffering brings redemption. And I'd like to turn this equation upside down. You had to find redemption now.
and how do you find is it is simple things like my head goes to um how to build that strength now is like, let's take today. I wake up. I'm super thankful. I have a beautiful 2.5-year-old. I have an amazing wife. I have the life I've always dreamed of. And I just sit with that and I feel comfortable with that. And that helps build that strength and resilience for me because I now have this moment in time where I know life can be awesome and grand, right? And then 2, a lot of times I'll think back to the worst of the worst. Uh, I got through that. I can get through anything. And so I consistently try to go back and remind myself that as well. And so when the bad things do happen, I have these frames for me to lean on. Is that what you're kind of talking about, or am I missing the mark?
That's one aspect. I would add to that that you need to understand what story you're writing for yourself. As I mentioned before, what your explanatory style, and when you go through negative inner dialogue, you need to stop and be reflective about which kind of writer you are and which kind of words, what are your key words? Always, never, I am this, I am that, I am unlucky, nobody loves me, I am set for failure. Okay, what are the limiting beliefs that are preventing you of becoming all you can? And then it's an art, it's an exercise, a habit of stopping mid negative inner dialogue and step outside of it and ask how I am explaining my life to myself. That's essential. I mentioned that therapy for many people is important. For me, it is. You have to build your physical strength. Okay? You have to have physical activity. That's very important. You need to know your positive psychology character strengths and owe them and practice them. You have to decide what information you allowed to come to your life. I think that we are in a world where we are bombarded and by information. Algorithms are deciding what gets to you, and you need as much as possible to be the owner of what content comes to your mind. And I am very picky about that. You know, I don't watch TV. I watch series, Netflix and things like that, but I don't watch the news. I don't watch anything that has ideology behind it, trying to convince me of things. I use social media professionally, LinkedIn. I use Instagram, but already the algorithm knows that I use it for fun things, for what is the best pizza in town, and the Cairo New Museum of Archaeology, and then even as is entertaining for fun and not for ideology. And then 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 I am very picky about what I let into my mind.
Yeah,
Picky.
that's beautiful. So we talked about, to just recap, you had reflection, health, understanding your positive traits and double down on those, your source of information. What did I miss? Is that everything?
No, you got them. You got
Yeah.
them.
Perfect. So let's do this. We're really transitioning into chapter 3. What I like to do kind of here though is a reset. So you have shared so many insights, beautiful life story, and we're at the positive psychology. You found this has fundamentally changed your life. Almost even like like a startup elevator pitch, 2 minutes or less. How would you explain positive psychology to everybody?
Positive psychology, the science of what works. It
Mm,
is science of flourishing, motivation, hope, optimism, resilience, purpose. For 100 years, psychology studied the negative, what hurts, psychosis, depression, neurosis. In 1998, the field began a revolution. That's not all we are. Our mind, our psyche is all about wonderful things, and we haven't studied them. We haven't explored them. And in 1998, that revolution began, and now we have tremendous amount of knowledge of how to achieve well-being in a
mm,
scientific way.
beautiful. That's a great concise way of getting there. And so, um, explain to me somebody that's interested in this. How would they get into it? What are your recommendations?
The first thing I'm going to do is a gift to everybody who's listening. You should know your top five. There are 24 character strengths of positive psychology, which are universal. We know that those 24 character strengths appear through the entire history of humanity in different cultures, in all cultures and geographies. Humor, love of learning, humility, forgiveness, spirituality, leadership, humor. These are part of the 24. And everybody of those 24 has five top ones, which are what we call the signature strengths. If you know them, just by knowing them, Mikey, your capacity to flourish goes 9 times fold. And if you apply them 18 times. And
Yeah.
two-third of people are unaware of their own character strengths. That day I found my own character strengths and changed my life. I said, I want at least one person a day. That's my commitment, that I give the one person a day at least the chance, the opportunity to live a fuller life. What is amazing, Mikey, is that everybody has them, the character strengths. That is just that's why by knowing them, you transition from using them by default to using them intentionally, and that's when the 9 times happens.
Right.
Because you already have them. It's a waste that you have them and you cannot apply them intentionally. Now, if you know your top 5 strengths that everybody should do now, and you say, okay, Monday I'm going to apply my strength number 1 intentionally. Tuesday I'm going to apply my strength number 2 intentionally. Wednesday my third intentionally, and you do that through the week. Studies show that your flourishing capacity goes through the roof.
And so here's what and this is the crazy world that we're in, right? When we start talking positive all the time, I don't know why, but this came to me, which is like you hear this term and you see it, which is toxic positivity, which
Yes.
is an overzealous waste of positivity or just a fakeness in positivity. How do you combat this concept based on what you're building?
I think that positive psychology made a mistake choosing its name. I understand why they did it as opposed to the traditional psychology of the what of suffering and what's wrong. I think that they chose the wrong name and they didn't foresee the the problem you're mentioning. This is not about positivity in the rosy way,
Yeah,
because negative emotions are also part of the game in positive psychology,
yeah,
and also because you need to have some pessimism to function.
yeah,
Okay, pessimism brings realism.
yeah.
Okay,
Would you
then
would you how would you redefine it? Would you call it purpose driven psychology, something like that?
I will.
How would you define
I've
it?
been thinking about purpose works. Some people call it now the psychology of happiness. I'm not so crazy about that either.
Happiness is a tough word too, right?
Yes, I like better of flourishing and well-being. When they ask me what
Mm,
positive psychology is about, it's flourishing and well-being.
mhm,
Okay, the
mhm.
psychology of flourishing and well-being,
How
which has
about how
been
about the concept of self-awareness? Does that do
it's
anything for you?
part of it. It's part of it, but I see self-awareness more like a tool and an attitude. I think that flourishing and well-being is more proactive, but the problem is that flourishing and well-being would not have been good for marketing.
Right, right.
Okay, then it's a tough one. I've been thinking about
Yeah.
different name, but definitely positive psychology has nothing to do with all positivity and rosy and realistic. That's not what it means, but it lends itself to that interpretation.
Correct, correct. And so, take me through how you're what you're doing with positive psychology right now, um, and what you're most excited about that you're working on.
Then I work a lot with corporations and with organizations and with leaders to move from fixing to nourishing. That's, to know the strengths. I'm called a lot to do workshops at teams, which I love tremendously, where I give a workshop on character strengths, where everybody get their character strengths, and we get a team character strengths map, and teams begin functioning at their full potential by the choir, the symphony of strengths that the members have, and I move teams to really perform much, much better and relate to each other much better. I am an expert on purpose. A purpose is defined as giving the best of yourself for the benefit of others.
Mm,
Giving the best of yourself for the benefit of others. I am one of the first 100 licensed consultants to the Purpose Factor instrument. The Purpose Factor instrument is the best instrument, the only instrument today to measure purpose. I am
take me through that.
I am a founding practitioner. It's an instrument that gives you a 49-page description of your purpose from all angles. It's the only instrument of its kind.
And
Today,
is this a simple questionnaire or
it's a
an interview?
questionnaire.
What does it look like?
It's a questionnaire you complete online that takes 25 minutes, like a standard. You know,
How did you get to these questions? How did you get to the output? What are your thoughts? Are you using combination of AI? This is a
no, no, no.
minds in the research
This
of
is this is a scientific instrument done by it took like 10,000 hours of research.
Mhm.
It's called the purpose factor, the same way that there is a Meyer-Briggs
Yeah, yeah.
for personality, and the same way that there's a VIA, values in action, for positive psychology. And there is now one for purpose called the purpose factor, a scientific, reliable, a consistent instrument. I was fortunate to be connected to the purpose company that created it and be among the 100 first practitioners of this
So
instrument.
so tools are great, right? But like I can't tell you how many personality tests or Myers Briggs or all these things, and it's just like to me, yes, it's good to have that insight, but none of those other tests I've ever take or your colors or whatever it is, they're interesting insights, but I don't think they were ever like, wow, this is like impactful, practical, and I want to apply this. So what's the difference between the positive psychology and the things that you're talking about
The
compared to
different,
all of these other things that I've been forced to take over my career?
well, look, again, instruments are tools. The secret sauce is on the workshop I give and the way I take you through the interpretation and the application of the tools. I have been able to create a kind of process, okay, which I have a formula for it, which is positive plus purpose equal peak performance.
Mm,
Then positive means character strengths. First, you get your character strengths, and I give a workshop on character strengths. Then you go into purpose. Why you are here? Why you come to work every day? What motivates you? And if you put those together in the right combination, then you get peak performance.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what I do. And look, it took me many years to perfect it. But I think that at the end of the day, and some consultants may not like what I'm going to say, it comes all about not how good the workshop is, but about the relationship you create.
Kidding
And
me? That's all it's about.
who you are. And I tell you, I just came from Chile and I gave a workshop in positive psychology. We went to a retreat center. These were all young executives, very successful. And they took me, 8 of them, to that retreat outside of Santiago of Chile, beautiful place. And that's supposed to be a 4-hour workshop in positive psychology. It went to 6 hours. They went so engaged. They were so engaged. And then I said, I'm going to give you as a gift to each one of you a 15 minutes power coach session. I was already exhausted after 6 hours, but we clicked so well. And I worked with them, each one of them 15 minutes. And nobody asked me a question about business.
Mm.
Given what we learn about positive psychology and life, I am having problem with my son. Don't know how to communicate with my partner. Okay, I am in a life transition. Everything came down to questions about life
Yeah.
and trust. And that's what I bring to the table. Okay, a connection with people. Yes, I know the instruments. I have great workshops. Okay, I think that it's very effective. But at the end of the day, I think what I do is because of my life experience, I connect with people and I having, after I do my job, I still connecting with people decades later. I am having a book coming out in a couple of months.
Beautiful.
It's called The Human Upgrade, The New Leadership for the AI Revolution.
Mm.
It's being published by Maxwell. For those who know about leadership, John Maxwell. It's being published by John Maxwell Leadership, one of the most prestigious houses of publishing. It's called The Human Upgrade. And what I have done in this book is the application of the principles of positive psychology to the challenges of AI.
To unpack that a little bit. So what are some of your main thoughts and points?
Then what we are finding with AI is greater performance and greater efficiency. That's the gift of AI. We perform better, faster, and more precise. At the same time, in companies, we are seeing an increase in anxiety, uncertainty, and depression. There are two forces which are opposite to each other. And what I hear from leaders is we know how to manage technology, we don't know how to manage the human side of technology. Then what's going on here? This new technology is supposed to make us better, and we are internally falling apart. And the solution is what I call the human upgrade, which is based on this formula that I mentioned before. Positivity, purpose equals peak performance. And what I do in the book, I go through all the systems and tools of how to apply positive psychology to make sure that you upgrade the human dimension as much as the technological or more. My point is that as AI grows, the human is going to become more valuable.
100%.
Okay. The luxury of the human, is going to be in some way more scarce, and it becomes more scarce, becomes more valuable. Then what I am trying to explain companies is that those who are investing on the human actually are increasing their value.
Yes.
Because the companies are going to make it in the future are not going to be only the ones who have the better technology, are the ones who people relate to at the human dimension. And those are the companies who are going to succeed.
Yep.
And then that's the core of the book, how to create a company where the human still core as we adopt technology. And there I go through a chapter on hope, a chapter on gratitude, a chapter on what kind of teams you need, what is the leadership, which kind of leadership you execute. And every chapter has the theoretical foundations, a lot of case studies, bring 2 or 3 cases for each one, how to, and then at the end, I bring workshops that each company can execute to achieve it.
Beautiful. I love it.
Okay. But I'm still betting on the human, but many leaders tell me they don't know how to do it.
Of
They
course.
don't know how to do it.
Do you
And
what
that's
and
what this
why
book
is
is about.
that? Do you think it is because my personal opinion, my head immediately goes to this. They don't wanna do it because it is by far, in my opinion, the harder thing to do.
Yeah, if humans, we are the most complex, difficult, challenging, but the most amazing, creative, and sensitive. Then yes, people thought that they're going to solve all the problems with the IT team. Bring the IT team or the HR, and I am sorry, we are beginning to understand that AI is not the technological change; it's a cultural change.
Yeah. It's a
Okay,
complete different way of living.
exactly. And who live that culture? People.
Yep.
Okay,
And if
then
you
you
don't
don't
figure
take
that out, it's you will be run by that robot in Japan, and you're not
exactly.
gonna be happy about it.
Then if you don't take care of people, the system will fail. And you have to take care of people in a different way because the way it worked before are not applicable anymore. And what I tried in this book is to say, okay, psychology has something to contribute to this discussion.
Let's do this. I always ask one question, um, at the end. I promise it's a softball. It's not gonna be crazy, but I do wanna take, the next 3 to 6 months. You've got the book coming out, but tell me what you're really excited about the next 3 to 6 months, the future, knowing that things are changing so fast on a daily basis.
Then I have another book coming out in
Nice.
Spanish. Yes, I read a lot. I have another book in Spanish called Una Oportunidad Más, One More Opportunity. Hopefully we'll make it to English, which is how to find opportunities today. And I write opportunities are like love. Everybody wants them and deserves them, but they don't know how to begin looking for them.
Good.
And what this book is about, how to find opportunities. And as much as I am excited about the book on the human upgrade, which is directed to businesses, this about opportunities is that directed to the general public.
Yeah, it's at a personal level, it seems.
Yes, the personal level. And I am beginning to talk a lot about that. And much of my social media today is about how to find opportunities,
It's
which
huge. This is gonna be huge over the next 12 months.
because they tell us that is the world of more opportunities than ever. That's what we hear, but very few people are believing that or experiencing this. And I began looking, and I found very little written about opportunities. And then I spent a long time studying it, and I came with this book that hopefully at some point is going to come out also in English. I always write a book in Spanish and a book in English because those are my
Yeah, I love
two
it.
my two. Then that's what I am focusing a lot on my coaching in English and in Spanish, wherever whoever I'm coaching, because they come to me a lot with this issue. People feel looking for something. They're looking and they don't know how to begin looking for it. They have this feeling inside that I am trapped. I am not getting enough for that I deserve. And how do I begin that search? An opportunity. You never. What I say in the book, that you never wait for an opportunity, which is the way we see opportunities. Opportunity is something that will happen.
Yep.
That's the wrong approach. Opportunities are already there. Opportunity is a way of seeing. It's training to see in a different way. The difference between people who have opportunities and do not is on the way they see. And that's what the book is about, training the art of seeing what is already there.
Yeah, and that resonates deeply with me because if I look back over my career and the cool things that I've done, they've all come from me taking action because I saw an opportunity.
Action brings clarity, no clarity action. That's something that also we have it wrong. I'm going to motivate and have clarity to act. It's the other way around. Action brings motivation and clarity.
100%. I do want one question before I ask your formal question, which is um, this opportunity concept is fascinating and probably will be not probably already is one of the hottest topics here for people because again the sense of self and everything other than reading your book or taking your test like really what is that one thing that you think about with opportunity? What's your advice to that person right now that's listening that is so locked in focused? We have tons of people watching and you have an opportunity to tell them about opportunity. What would you say?
Yeah, you have a a opportunity, and I may be repetitive, but it's important. We were trained to connect the word opportunity to a future event. Wait for an opportunity. The opportunity will come. And then when we think about opportunity, we are almost pushed into a passive attitude, as if we are looking for an opportunity. And the looking for, the waiting is all like it will. And the people who have opportunities operate from what is here right now. Opportunities do not appear. They are not magic. Opportunities are a way of seeing, are an attitude of taking control of your life right now, of being positive right now, of connecting the dots right now, of asking yourself, what am I going to do within the next 20 seconds? The opportunity begins in the next 20 seconds. It could be a search on ChatGPT. It could be the right phone call. Okay. It could be sitting and writing something. It could be dreaming of something, but opportunity begins in the next 20 seconds. If you cannot think about what you're going to do in the next 20 seconds, then you are not on the opportunity path.
Mm,
Okay. That is right now. I'm going to tell you something that I am convinced. One thing that AI is going to do is going to release us from the burden of content. It's
agreed.
going to be the content available world. Then who is going to have the upper hand in a world full of content? The person who will have the upper hand in a world full of content is the person who asks the best question.
Boom. You nailed it. And speaking of questions, to wind it down, I ask every guest that comes through this show the same question at the end. If you were to describe to somebody how the Mikey G experience was, what would you say?
No, authentic,
That's it. That's it. And it
authentic.
literally 100% success rate that you felt that because that is so meaningful in this day and age. Man, if I think back at and you can tell that you've talked about this a lot, right? Uh, but one, you were vulnerable and you shared those stories, and there's just no doubt in my mind. I said just one person will be affected by the conversation today. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people. This could fundamentally change their opportunity or the way they think about their purpose and their mission and their vision. And I can't critically enough just put the importance down on how monumental these concepts are for, and I'm not saying the next decade. I am literally saying the next 12 months or less.
Then, Mikey, I wanted to have the opportunity to have a conversation like this one. I didn't wait. I was one morning, opened my LinkedIn and began looking for you.
Yeah,
And I found you.
thanks.
Okay. I didn't wait for you to contact me. The opportunity was me going to the LinkedIn, and the next 20 seconds took me more, find people like you. Again, I created the opportunity. I didn't wait. Would have never happened.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And that's what I mean about opportunity. You had to make the first move.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree. And I deeply like this is, and like I said in the beginning too, I really do look at this as the beginning of a friendship. I cannot
Absolutely.
wait to have many, many follow up conversations. I want to help your cause, man. I deeply believe in that. I already texted. I'm gonna do my positivity psychology test. I think you came off insanely authentic. You were vulnerable. You shared insights that are very simple, but yet so profound all at the same time. I can tell your brain is just beautifully intelligent. The amount I can tell the wisdom, right? Wisdom is the word that comes to my mind
Thank you. Thank you
because
so
it's a
much.
lot of not only did you experience life, I can tell you worked really, really hard at learning things a majority of your life too. And that is such a rare trait, and that should never be lost on you, not in an egotistical way, right? But in the fact that you should be proud,
Thank you
prideful
so much.
of the
Again,
things that you've done and the way that you've done them. And I think the best thing that you can ever do with the things that you've gone through, and the reason why I do, like I actually always started all this whole thing to do exactly what we're doing right now is to share this story to help people, and you've taken something so negative and turned it into something so positive, and not in the toxic positivity way. And I think you did a beautiful, beautiful job of describing it, taking us through your life story. And from the bottom of my heart, you gave me an hour and 43 minutes. That is the most valuable thing anybody has is time. And I appreciate that really from the bottom of my heart. So thank you, Alfredo. Thank
thank you
you
so much.
for taking that opportunity to find me because this is one of the better podcasts I've ever had.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Again, we call it flow in positive psychology.
Yes.
When hours go like minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And with that being said, people, we are at the end of the Mikey G podcast experience. We appreciate you all. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please spread the word about Alfredo. Look him up on LinkedIn. His name's on the bottom of the screen. I'll put all the links to his new books when they come out and all the ways that you can find the positive psychology, sense of self, purpose, all of the things that we've talked about. We love you all. Mikey G and Alfredo are out.